Hi everyone, and welcome back to another of what is becoming an increasingly common occurrence, which is to say this is another special episode or bonus episode of The Library is Open. So I hope you brought your library card, darling. Still got no better at the tongue pops. So this is part 1 of 2 of a little mini sort of series that I'm going to do that I have promised for a while about my sort of top cozy crime book series. And I think my thinking behind this was not just from the title, which will be or is Cozy Crime for Troubled Times, but I started to thinking about how much it's really nice, particularly in difficult circumstances, to have sort of quite comforting books around you, you know, things that are quite reliable. Do excuse me, I'm so sorry about that. That's how comfortable I am, you see, because it's cozy crime, you see. So I've put a dressing gown on in lavender, which is nice, and I've got my little whimsical cup again, which I didn't show properly last time. It's Chip from Beauty and the Beast. So I'm all cozy, ready to talk about cozy crime, you see. That was my thinking. But yeah, I thought, isn't it nice to have things that whereby you know, you can just dive into them and read them, and you know, there's this idea that I don't want to say they're not challenging or that they're not well written or anything like that, but the idea is that they're like a comfort blanket, you know, because I think with cozy crime, it's the sort of the theory is that they're sort of reliable, and you know, there's that idea that everything's going to be okay by the end of the book, and also I think that oftentimes it's particular characters that you fall in love with. So we're looking at things like cozy crime. They're less likely to be like detective superintendents who are the detectives, or you know, it's not going to be set at the Met or in you know, a coroner's office or anything. These are going to be a very sort of archetypal descendants of like Miss Marple or Lord Peter Wimsey, people like that. And they tend to be like quite large series of those as well, because they become beloved characters that we all sort of get on board with. So I was going to do a top 10 originally, but actually what I think I'm going to do is 2 videos of 6, which makes no sense whatsoever, but I just want to cover all my bases, and they won't be in a particular order. So here's part 1 anyway of my favourite cozy crime books. So let's start with possibly, I said they weren't going to be in order, but this is possibly my favourite series. I've been reading these for years and years and years. When was this one first published? This was 1992. I didn't read it as early as that, but I would say the sort of early 2000s I started on these. And this is MC Beaton's Agatha Raisin series. The copy I've got here is the very first book, The Quiche of Death. Which is, you know, I think the title is what drew me in originally. I was going to college at the time, and I was having a bit of a difficult time personally, and really looking for something soothing and warming and very sort of just pure enjoyment, and being a massive fan of the detective genre, you know, this just appealed to me. I mean, these are the old covers now, but look at that, they're beautiful, aren't they? Beautiful paintings. This series, to give you a brief premise, is our main character is Agatha Raisin, who's in the first book, Quiche of Death, we meet she's retiring from her PR firm in London and moving to the Cotswolds because it's been a childhood dream of hers. And she sort of tries to get involved in village life and finds it quite difficult to do so. And in this first book, our initial introduction to her, she ends up baking a quiche. She orders a quiche from a quichery in Chelsea and enters it into a village competition as her own. And the main judge, Reginald Cummins Brown, eats it and then is subsequently poisoned. So she's under suspicion for this, and it's up to her to sort of track down the real killer. As the series goes along, it sort of introduces more of her friends, like her former PR assistant Roy, who's a delightful character, her next door neighbour James, with whom there's a romantic frisson, a character called Sir Charles Frayth, who's like a baronet, Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife, and they're just a wonderful sort of ensemble cast of characters. and later she ends up going into business for herself as a private detective. But what I love about these is she's very sort of, Agatha is described as deliciously un-PC, but not in the sense that she's, you know, I think sometimes when we say un-PC, people think it's just an excuse, or rather a justification for, you know, bad behaviour and like rude opinions and stuff like that. It's not that, it's more just that she's a character who speaks as she finds, but is also ultimately respectful of people. There's a Radio 4 series of this which is brilliant, which is stars Penelope Keith as Agatha. That's great. They're also all available on audiobooks, again read by Penelope Keith. And there's a TV series starring Ashley Jensen on Sky, which is now in its 3rd season, I believe. But these are an absolute joy, and I would completely recommend them. So that's Agatha Raisin. That's one. The second in my cozy crime faves this is a brilliant series. I really, really like this, and the series is called The Number 2 Feline Detective Agency. This is the 4th book in the series, I believe, that I've got as an example. Yes, The Ghost of Christmas Paws, and this is by Mandy Morton. And the conceit here is that everybody in the world is cats, basically. So it's the human world as we recognise it, but they're all cats. And you just have to buy into that conceit. So they live very much like people, but again, they're cats. And it centres around our 2 main characters, Hetty Bagshot and Tilly, who's her assistant, and they own the Number 2 Feline Detective Agency, where they live, and they investigate crimes. I mean, you might be forgiven for thinking that, given that the main characters are felines, that these are quite sort of like silly crimes, or, you know, quite childlike, but they're not. These crimes are brutal. They just so happen to be cats. So there's been about, how many are there now? I think there's about 8 novels now, and they're very sort of self-aware as well, which is really nice. So like the characters have names based on like their jobs, or that refer to their status as felines. So like the postmistress is called like Lavender Stamp, and the bakers are called the Butter Twins, and so on and so forth. But once you get past the whole feline thing, they are essentially murder mysteries, and it's just really nice, and quite a whimsical twist, I think. And I really, really enjoy these. There are also some really good audio recordings of this series. So yeah, that's my second recommendation, the Number 2 Feline Detective Agency. Where should we go next? Yes, of course. So, the third series I want to mention is the Kate Shackleton Mysteries by Frances Brody. This is book... This is book 11, I believe, yes, The Body on the Train. But this is a series set in Yorkshire, and our protagonist is Kate Shackleton, who is an adopted... fairly wealthy young girl whose dad's a police commissioner, and he sort of encourages in her inadvertently this sort of interest in crime and so on and so forth, and she ends up becoming a private investigator. So this is in the I think it starts in the 20s and it goes through to the 30s, where we currently are. There is a new one due out in I think October, and yeah, these are a really nice look at, you know, a sort of quite popular decade that isn't usually seen outside of London, if that makes sense. I was thinking about this the other day, how we so often associate periods of time with particular locations. So like for the 20s, for instance, I always think of as like either in London or in New York and so on. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, like, you know, obviously it was the 20s everywhere. And in here it's Yorkshire. So, yeah, there's really interesting, it has some interesting stuff also about the aftermath of the First World War, and, you know, the repercussions that had. And there's some really earthy details as well. So while it is still sort of cozy crime, there is also a grounding in more what would I call it? Some quite near the bone stuff in terms of violence and, you know, the political and social setting, but still with a good old-fashioned dollop of golden age crime mystery goodness. So that's the Kate Shackleton series by Francis Brody. Next up, I don't have a copy of this because I read them all on ebook, but these are, I'm kind of cheating here, these are two series I should say, by an Australian writer called C.A. Larmer. The first series she writes is called the Ghostwriter series, which is centered around freelance ghostwriter Roxy Parker, who basically she's hired to ghostwrite biographies and things for celebrities, and inadvertently ends up stumbling into you know, crimes and fiendish daring do and so on and so forth, and they all primarily take place in Sydney. Again, as with Cosy Crime, a great ensemble of characters, from her agent through to the guy she's kind of in love with, not sure, through to the police chief who she ends up befriending through her unofficial detective work. And Roxy's just a really interesting character, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there as well about writing, and it's also nice to get a perspective from you know, another country, albeit one with Australia that is not completely dissimilar to the UK, but it's nice to read about you know, what that tradition of detective fiction kind of is. Her second series that I should mention, which is also delightful, is this is a much smaller series so far, it's ongoing, and it's the Agatha Christie Book Club, which is basically about a book club of people who come together to discuss Agatha Christie titles. So, you know, when I saw this, I was just in there, and end up getting embroiled in murder. There's some nice allusions to like Agatha Christie and stuff, so, you know, we get like a boat murder, and we get a murder in a sort of lodge in the mountains and so on and so forth, but still with that very individual sort of Aussie flavour to the proceedings. So it's a bit like an homage, as it were. But both series are great. I think they're self-published, which is I wouldn't swear to that, but I think they are. But I think they're really, really good series, and I've been using them a lot over lockdown as like bedtime reading, and still finding them compelling. So that's that. Next up, another book series that I do have a copy of. This is book 5 in the series, and this is the Josephine Tey Mysteries by Nicola Upson. And these are centred around the crime author Josephine Tey, who was a real person. This seems to be quite in vogue lately with crime series of sort of casting famous historical figures as investigators and sort of reimagining things that might have happened to them while it's tied into the actual details about their real lives. So this one is about the first book in the series. I think it's An Expert in Murder. Takes as its setting the Josephine Tey's play Richard of Bordeaux, as I recall, and takes place in Theatreland. But then the books sort of move on and they chart her real life with things that might have happened. For instance, there's one, I think it's Fear in the Sunlight, which it deals with the fact that Josephine Tey had one of her films made into a movie by... who was it? Oh, it's really famous, it's really good now. Hitchcock. So one of her films was made, one of her books, I think A Shilling for Candles, was made into a film by Hitchcock. And, you know, that really happened, and obviously the crime stuff around it is kind of manufactured. It's also really interesting for some queer representation as well, because Josephine Tey is sort of acknowledged to have been in same-sex relationships. Obviously not confirmed at the time, given the period, but it sort of gives a little bit of background and some more context to that, as well as reimagining a romantic partner. Again, there's some really good stuff here about the aftermath of the war as well, and some really colourful details about, you know, the right in life, be that for theatre or be that for, you know, just everyday fiction. So yeah, this is a really great series. Nicola Upson's a lovely writer, and there's a very sort of almost literary quality to these, which just make them a really, really fulfilling read. She knows a lot about character, and a lot about her subject, which is great. So finally, this is a whimsical one that I decided to throw in at the last minute, and I have done a whole video on this series, but I'd be remiss not to mention it, is we return to my childhood still favourite, The Babysitter's Club, which is, if you see my Babysitter's Club video, you'll know that massive fan of that sort of 80s, 90s series aimed at teenage girls, but, you know, or maybe middle school grade, but, you know, beloved of many people of all kinds of gender identities. And the series is ostensibly set in Stony Brook, Connecticut, about a group of girls who form a club for babysitting, basically, and it's about their adventures. But there's a mystery series spin-off, and also 4 super specials. So each of the mysteries is narrated by one of the members of the club, but the mystery specials are narrated by all the characters, but in different chapters. And they tend to be, you know, sort of like larger scale mysteries. Now, to be fair, some of the mysteries in the main canon series are not really mysteries at all, per se. They turn out to have quite innocent explanations, but some of them really are, like, sort of crime-based things. And, you know, if you've got younger children or people who like a sort of retro feel, they're very easy to read, and they're a really nice introduction to that sort of classic crime, cozy crime, murder mystery kind of genre, which is great because we need more recruits into the crime genre. So I just thought I'd mention these as well, because it's also nice, I think, to do a bit of something for all ages and all tastes. These are a brilliant slice of, as I say, late 80s, early 90s sort of teen culture within the murder mystery genre. So that's that. So that's it for part 1 of my Cozy Crime for Troubled Times. Do tune into the next episode when I will reveal the next 6, because apparently I can't just do 10, because that's the kind of person that I am. So I'm doing a top sort of 12, as it were. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know your favourite comfort reads. Are you a fan of cozy crime, or do you go somewhere else for your kind of cozy, you know, make me feel good kind of reading? Let me know. Sound off below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and drop me a comment, because I love to read them. Alright, for now the library is closed, so put your library card somewhere safe, and I will see you in the next video. Much love. Mwah.